Story 1. I'm a 32-year-old man, and my childhood could have been pretty good. But my parents wanted to do something good, so they became foster parents. I think that was a really kind thing to do. Those kids needed someone to care for them. The problem was that I felt ignored. I didn't get as much attention as the foster kids because my parents thought I was old enough to take care of myself and didn't need their help as much. When my grandparents gave me gifts, my parents would often give them to the foster kids instead. So, my grandparents decided to do something different. They started taking me out for special experiences instead of buying me gifts. I got to go to the movies, have meals at restaurants, and go on weekend trips with them. My grandparents on my dad's side took me to Disneyland, and my grandparents on my mom's side took me to New York City. My parents tried to get my grandparents to give them the money they would have spent on me, instead of taking me on those special outings. But I pleaded with my grandparents not to do that. I wanted to keep our special times together just the way they were. I've been dealing with this situation for 18 years now, and I'm managing all right, but my parents aren't doing well. They exhausted themselves taking care of all those foster kids. Even the money they received for doing so wasn't enough to make up for everything they gave up. When my parents asked me for help, I said no. I knew that if I gave them money, they would just use it on the foster kids they took in after I moved out. I told them they had plenty of other foster kids who could help them out, and they should ask one of them for money instead. My mom told me she was disappointed in me and thought she had taught me to be more helpful. But I reminded her that I basically raised myself from the age of 8 onwards. I also mentioned that my grandparents are exhausted and drained from helping my parents too many times already. My parents owe them a lot of money, and I don't want to see my grandparents hurt even more. My wife says she gets why I'm upset, but thinks I'm being too harsh. My mom thinks I'm still holding on to childhood resentments. I've cut off all contact with my dad and don't want to talk to him. I'm pretty sure he's still giving away my old stuff to the new foster kids, just like he always did. Story 2. Ada for telling my father to get over the vase my son broke. I still remember when I was a teenager, my dad came home with a big glass vase. He filled it with wine corks and placed it on a small table in our living room. For years, it sat there, never moving from that spot. Every month, my family and I would visit my dad for lunch. Last October, my son was running around in my dad's living room, full of energy. In a split second, he accidentally knocked over the small table, and the vase fell to the floor, shattering into pieces. I quickly apologized and offered to buy a new vase to replace the broken one. My husband and I cleaned up the mess together. But my dad refused my offer, saying he understood that it was an accident and was just relieved that my son was okay. At the time, my son was only 2 years old, and there was a lot of broken glass on the floor, so my dad was just grateful that he hadn't gotten hurt. Over the next few months, I repeatedly apologized and offered to pay for a new vase, but my dad kept brushing it off, saying everything was okay. No matter how many times I brought it up, he just wouldn't let me make it up to him. But earlier this year, my dad started reminiscing about the vase, saying how much he loved it and how pricey it was when he first bought it. As time went on, his comments turned into complaints, and he began to bring it up more and more often. It seemed like he was suddenly really upset about the vase, even though he had initially been so understanding when it broke. Every time we visited, my dad would mention the broken vase, almost like a reminder. He'd say things like, "Remember that nice vase your son broke, or be careful. Don't let him break anything else sometimes." He'd even make jokes like, "Next time, give me some warning so I can hide my good stuff from your little one," but it didn't feel like he was really joking. Last week, we went to my dad's party at his house. One of his friends, who hadn't been over in a while, noticed the vase was missing and asked my dad what had happened to it. My dad pointed to my son and said, My little troublemaker broke it, and my daughter hasn't bothered to replace it yet. He said it in a way that felt hurtful and embarrassing. My husband was standing close by and heard the whole thing. Later, after the party, I confronted my dad about what he said. We ended up in a heated argument. He insisted that he had every right to be upset and complain about his property being damaged by my son. He didn't seem to care that his words had hurt me and my family. I stood my ground and told my dad that while he had the right to be upset, he couldn't have it both ways. He had chosen not to accept my offer to replace the vase, so he couldn't keep blaming me for not doing it. I gave him an ultimatum: either take back his forgiveness and let's find a solution, or move on from the vase and stop blaming my young son for the accident. I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate him speaking negatively about my child over a simple mistake. Even after our argument, my dad still refuses to see things from my perspective. He's still convinced that I'm the one who's wrong and that I should be doing more to make up for the broken vase. It's frustrating and hurtful that he can't seem to let go of his anger and blame. Story 3. I'm 29 and my partner is 28. He has a brother who's 35 and a sister who's 32. She has 2 kids, and last year her youngest son, who's only 2, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. It's been really tough for my sister-in-law and her family to manage his condition, and they're still adjusting to the big changes it's brought to their lives. My sister-in-law and her family were hoping to get a special device called a pump to help my nephew manage his diabetes. This pump would make a huge difference in keeping his levels under control and would make their daily life much easier. The problem is that the pump is really expensive, costing between $5,000 and $10,000. My sister-in-law and her partner don't have that kind of money, and even though they've been saving up, they still have a ways to go before they can afford it. My partner and I have 2 little ones of our own, and we can't even imagine how hard it must be for my sister-in-law and her family to deal with my nephew's diabetes. That's why we decided to offer to pay for the pump ourselves. We're not rich or anything. We're actually living off my partner's income as an electrician, and I stay home with our kids, but we're good at managing our money and always make sure we have some savings set aside. My sister-in-law and her partner turned down our offer to pay for the pump, which was a relief. They were able to get the pump covered by their health insurance, which was amazing news. I thought that was the end of it, a happy ending, problem solved. But little did I know that there was more to come. About a month after we offered to help my sister-in-law with the pump, my partner's brother announced that he was getting married. His fiancée has disabilities that prevent her from working, which I totally understand and respect. However, she also has a tendency to splurge on really expensive things, which struck me as quite extravagant. We all got together for dinner to celebrate my partner's brother's engagement. At one point, the happy couple stood up to give a speech, thanking everyone for their love and support. But then they surprised us by thanking my partner and me specifically for helping to pay for their dream wedding. I was taken aback and didn't know what to say, so I just kept quiet for the moment. Later, we pulled them aside and asked them what they meant by that, because we hadn't contributed anything to their wedding. They told us that they assumed we had $10,000 available since we weren't using it for the pump. They thought we were just redirecting the money to a different family expense, and to them, a wedding was equivalent. We were shocked. My partner tried to explain that it's not the same thing at all. A diabetes pump is a life-saving necessity for our nephew, whereas a wedding is a celebration. But my brother-in-law got defensive and angry, accusing us of playing favorites with their sister. My brother-in-law argued that we were willing to spend the money on the pump, so why not on their wedding? I explained that we had only intended to use the money for the pump, and otherwise it would stay in our emergency fund for our own family's needs. But he wouldn't listen. and instead called US selfish. The conversation ended in a heated argument, and we decided to leave early. After we left, we started receiving texts from other family members, all siding with my brother-in-law and making us feel guilty for not contributing to the wedding. They're saying that his fiancée can't work, so we should help out. I thought we'd done nothing wrong. But now these messages are making me wonder, am I the asshole état for not wanting to pay for their wedding?